Welcome to a new episode of the Sustainable Living Podcast. Batteries are rapidly becoming one of the most strategic technologies of Europe's green transition. They power electric vehicles, support renewable energy integration, and are increasingly linked to Europe's ambitions for industrial competitiveness and energy security. To address this growing importance, the European Union has introduced a new battery regulation that goes far beyond waste management. What does this mean for businesses, policymakers, and consumers? We will explore today, and for that, I'm joined today by Eric Ruyters, General Secretary of EUCOBAT, which is the European association representing national battery collection and recycling organizations across Europe. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you very much.
Let's start with addressing this new regulation because at the Romania-Sweden expert exchange in Bucharest, you were here with us. You described the new EU battery regulation as a major transformation for the sector. But was it necessary to move forward from a waste-focused approach toward the full life cycle approach for batteries?
Yeah, there were actually two things when you can say high level on the changes. First of all, it all changed from a directive into a regulation, which is also creating new aspects in the market, and indeed from an end-of-life focus to a full life cycle focus. When you look to the difference in directive and regulation, it means actually, and I keep it in a non-lawyer language, directive means actually that the Commission is asking to the member states, to Romania, to please incorporate certain aspects in the legislation. But this can be done, yes, this can be done in variations linked to other legislations you have already in the country. A regulation means actually you need to implement this exactly in your legislation, and it will be at the same time for all other member states. So that creates actually a level playing field. No differences in definitions and other things between the countries. So that's one thing of the aspects. Then the other thing is that at first it was only focused on end of life. Producers needed to collect or take back the batteries, and that's it. But now it's the full life cycle to see, and that's actually coming from the Green Deal, where they want to see in how they can prolong life cycle, so batteries last longer, and then also can be reused in a second life. And then thirdly, once they are really end of life, collected, take back, and then recycled, and then the content of materials will be reused again in batteries. So the full circle as a total. And that makes it a huge change in how to approach everything in the market.
It will be helpful to understand why batteries matter for Europe's future. So let me ask you, how strategic is the battery sector today for Europe's energy security? And what are the risks if Europe fails to build a truly circular ecosystem?
Well, I can never see all the total agenda, of course, of the politicians because they don't call me to see everything with me. But when you look to what is happening in the market and in our lives, there's of course from the Green Deal the environmental approach. And the environmental approach with electrification is, of course, much better than still using fossil energy. And fossil energy, of course, also has other negative approaches on that. So electrifying everything on that level could make it much easier in the energy we all need every day on that level. So I think that's part of the thing. But the environmental impact we should not miss also. Fossil energy is a polluting energy. So electrifying everything means also that it's more in the green aspect.
Now let's see how we can turn regulation into reality. And
Mhm.
one of the issues you mentioned and highlight in your presentation was the need for harmonized implementation across member states. What are the biggest implementation challenges you see happening across Europe?
Well, at the moment, it's complicated for the member states to really reach the deadlines in the regulation. And I mean with reaching the deadlines in the regulation is having everything implemented at the same time uh, on the same matter. Because as I said earlier, the regulation means the same ruling for every member state, no variations, no differences on that level. But this is very complicated. You see, um, maybe not misunderstanding, but complexity in understanding how to incorporate this in their own legislation. And then, of course, sometimes there's also other political developments with elections, which also postpones the deadlines, unfortunately. But that's a critical point because if you have a regulation, you create level playing field. But if you don't match the regulation, so if you're late in implementing it, that creates actually a disorder in everything. Producers will have issues in understanding, like, but I put this battery on the market in another in Germany, for example, but when I go to Romania, it's completely different. So what should I do? So there can be hesitation in what to do. There can be hesitation in investments, but also a lack of understanding. And when there's a lack of understanding, issues start, even if everything wants to be done in the best way. So therefore, it's really important that with the regulation, everybody speeds up and get the legislation on time.
You represent EUCOBAT, as I mentioned. Maybe you can introduce us into the organization. And from EUCOBAT perspective, what would the true level playing field look like? What would be the ideal setup?
Yes, well, actually, that's a good point and good question. So EUCOBAT is the European Association for National Collection Schemes of all waste batteries. And I say explicitly all waste batteries, because sometimes there's the understanding, oh, it's only these small batteries you have at home, that is these pen lights, as we say, or button cells, as we say. But it's not only that. It's in all the categories you can imagine, from indeed the small button cells all the way up to the large battery industry developments on that part. And the members of EUCOBAT in the different categories with the regulation do their work in taking back or collecting the waste batteries. So that's on the membership. And obviously within the membership, the members as non-profit associations also really work closely together in understanding everything, in learning from each other, having best practices together, and of course also having one voice from the collection schemes in discussion with the legislators locally and also Central Europe with the Commission, really to understand everything, what is happening, how is the implementation going, and what can we do on that matter as such. So yeah, but then you had a second part of the question,
Yes,
which I
what would the ideal system look like for?
well, the ideal system looking like further on is indeed actually in how we are structured and how we move forward with the legislation. So, but then it's very important that the legislation is really implemented in a correct way, because also for our members, it's important to understand what they can do. A short example, a simple example, electric vehicle batteries are in the directive an industrial battery. But in the regulation, they now are a separate category with separate objectives, separate way of working, separate approaches. So if you don't follow that separation in the regulation, there's a blur in everything you do. And that's, of course, very important on the legislation part to work on. And we, from an EUCOBAT point of view, we really try to push forward on that simplicity and getting the same ruling everywhere.
Let's move to the extended producer responsibility in this new ecosystem. How is the role of producers changing, and do you think companies are fully aware of the operational and financial responsibilities coming ahead?
Well, looking to the second part of your question, no, I don't believe they are fully aware what is happening. Some still believe that looking back to the directive, which was mainly focused on portable batteries, say the batteries you have at home, but the battery regulation is really in a full scope on everything and really changing also their way of working and their way of living in the battery business. So that's a very important thing, and they need to realize. And unfortunately, still producers in the industrial batteries and also electric vehicle batteries, they don't have a real feeling and understanding what the regulation is doing on that part. So from our perspective, from EUCOBAT perspective, obviously what you see is that the current players in the market, the current collection schemes in the market, actually, instead of having 5 different categories, 5 different PROs, producer organizations, you see more and more one organization managing the whole system in all the categories. Although there are different obligations, although there are different setups and way of workings in the different categories, but you see this more and more by the same organizations. Need to say, there's differences in the countries. And what I mean with differences in the countries is that you have setups in certain countries, for example, in the Netherlands, where you have one PRO only responsible for a certain battery category. But in other countries, like in Romania, for example, you have more PROs working in the same category. This is okay. This is good in looking on how it's working. But obviously, the collaboration between the two will be more and more necessary. This will be also things which the competent authorities from the government will need to look at, and they will manage that also to have a real playing field in the country, and that all the objectives, because in the end it's a country objective, not a PRO objective. So the country objective is the total country size, and that could be covered by more organizations and associations. And this collaboration, that's an important topic for the future as well.
That's perfect. But if we are talking about circularity, we see that Europe is increasingly focused on critical raw materials and, of course, reducing dependency on global supply chain. And I want to ask you now about the importance of the battery recycling, if it's important in securing access to these materials, and if
Yes.
recycling can realistically become a major source of critical raw materials.
Yes, and absolutely. So there is, first of all, a change from the directive to the regulation. In the past, in the directive, the producers were responsible for the efficiency of the recycling part. So the recyclers, they do the work, but it was under the responsibility of the producers. Within the regulation, they switched actually, with your question actually in mind, because when you look to how the regulation now is ordered, is that everything with recycling itself, so the retrieve of materials, the content of materials, the recycling efficiency of itself is now managed by the recyclers themselves, and they need to report this to the competent authorities and the member state. Obviously, there's a collaboration between the two. Because the PROs choose where they go to, they can choose that as long as, of course, the minimum achievements are there. But you see that on that point. So when you go then on the fact that they need to do a better job in getting the recycled efficiency, in getting the content of materials, then you already see an increase of raw materials in the country itself, then or at the recycling facility itself. But then the other crucial part is that the regulation is also enforcing the use of recycled content into new materials, and that makes the full circle. So from that perspective, it's really making it a better field and a competition field. If technology can make it that 100% can be used, which is not the case today, then you could talk about a really full circle, but at least it's a first start in using the recycled content into new batteries.
Okay, so how about the second life batteries?
So the second life batteries is actually prolonging life cycle. So instead of having, say, a battery last 10 years, for example, some do shorter, some do way longer, but say 10 years, it's end of life, we collect and we recycle. No, what you can see, and you see it, for example, in the electric vehicles, they are with stronger batteries, higher capacity batteries, and with all the legislation around that for electric vehicles, they become sooner end of life, but these batteries can still be used in storage solutions, for example. So that means that you can take them, you can prepare them, and put them in a new product line. And then it can be used as a longer life cycle, another 10 years maybe. And so that makes it now the battery lasts 20 years instead of 10 years in my example. That's one part. And some part is also that the batteries are end of life, but actually they still work and they can still be replaced in the same products as they were used for and built for in the beginning, as they call remanufacturing. So there's a lot of things which is now incorporated in the regulation, which makes it possible to prolong life cycle. If I just compare to the directive, actually the directive was very clear. Waste cannot be commercialized, need to be recycled. So if you get a waste battery, even if this battery can still work, you need to recycle. And this is a good part of the regulation, that it now opens the possibility to have a longer life cycle for the same battery.
Now, looking specifically at Romania and even larger at the Eastern Europe, where do you see the greatest opportunities within the battery value chain?
But well, I think what is anyway a thing is recycling capacity. So having this closer by, and it doesn't mean that every country should have their own recycling facilities, but at least you should not go from Romania to France or to Finland to be able to recycle your batteries. So that's one part. But also looking to second use. And what you see is, of course, energy questions. And the second life in lithium batteries mainly are storage solutions linked to, for example, solar parks. Well, I could imagine large solar parks or wind parks in Romania with huge storage solutions, which will actually then make it probably easier in the future for hold the energy capacity in the country. Because you see in many countries, also Romania, that the grid, as they say, is full. It's completely full. You cannot put additional business to it, or even for the households, it's difficult to get everything straight. So by prolonging life cycle, by creating storage solutions in this regulation part, yeah, that's a good opportunity. And I think Romania could play a good role in that level on recycling and also energy with wind and solar parks.
Looking at the battery regulation, what needs to happen in the next 2 years? So,
In the next 2 years,
in
well,
order to
thank you.
avoid the implementation gaps,
Well,
and
that's
accelerate progress.
exactly. So
Two
thank you
years
for the
is
short time,
yes,
because
short
most
time.
people always talk about what to do in 10 years and 20.
Exactly.
I don't know actually, because how will it evolve? And we still have the implementation phase. So actually, I would urge to have the implementation phase speeded, that every member state, including Romania, to speed up with the implementation, because they're far behind um, compared to other member states. And that means that you are in the competitive field also missing a lot of topics, because it will bring insecurity with the producers. What should I do? I build my battery, I go to Germany, and there I have the regulation, but I go to Romania, and then it's still in the directive, but it's a different definition. I have different obligations. What should I do? So there's a lot of insecurity there. And also the knowledge in the competent authorities should grow there to understand what is happening. So that to get everything on speed, and I need to say it's not only Romania, there are many other countries, unfortunately, in the same level. That's the most important part. Get the regulation implemented in the right order as soon as possible, but in the right way. So that means that won't be possible next month. you need to manage that in a short term. So maybe say, indeed, January, we need to do X, and then the year after in January, we need to have it finalized. So exactly within your term of 2 years then.
That's perfect. That's something to live with after this
Yes.
this discussion. And Eric, I would like to thank you so much for sharing your insights on one of the most important policy, I may say, currently taking place in Europe. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the time. Thank you for having me and be able to talk about this because it's so important topic. Batteries is actually not the product people think about, but it is the most important product in getting all the energy done. So thank you, and looking forward to everything what is happening in Romania.